Simply put, if we don't protect nature, we can't protect ourselves.
We have all heard of climate change, or some form of it. According to PewResearch.org, about 2 in every 3 Americans believe that the federal government isn't doing enough to reduce the effects of climate change. But let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to think about who discovered global warming? My guess is that you probably haven't. The person who discovered the effects of global warming on the Earth's atmosphere was Eunice Foote. But that brings up the question, how did a scientist in the early 1800s come up with this discovery? Well, let's find out. Eunice Foote, also known as Eunice Newton Foote, was born in 1819 in Goshen, Connecticut. However, for the most part of her childhood, she grew up in Bloomfield, New York. As her name suggests, she was indeed a very distant relative of Sir Isaac Newton. Yes, the person who came up with the 3 laws of motion. Her mother was Thurza Newton, and her father was Isaac Newton Jr. Eunice Foote had 6 sisters and 5 brothers. It should be noted that getting a decent education in the 1800s was no easy task. Women's rights were simply not as just and fair as they are today. Eunice Foote was educated at the Troy Female Seminary from 1836 to 1838. Students who attended the seminary were permitted to attend a nearby science college, which was where Foote learned foundational chemistry and biology. In 1841, Eunice Foote married Elisha Foote, who was a judge, mathematician, and an inventor who resided in East Bloomfield. Eunice Foote was a member of the editorial committee for the 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, which was the first women's rights convention at the time. She was also one of the first few people to sign the Declaration of Sentiments, along with her husband. Yes, we know that she discovered the effects of global warming. But that brings up the essential question. How did she do it? Well, first off, she gathered an air pump, 4 mercury thermometers, and 2 glass cylinders. She proceeded to place 2 thermometers in each cylinder. Then, by using the air pump, she took out the air from one cylinder and compressed it into the other. Allowing both cylinders to reach the same temperature, she placed the cylinders into the sunlight to measure the difference in temperature once heated up and under different moisture conditions. She performed the same set of steps on carbon dioxide, common air, and hydrogen. With all the data she had collected, Eunice concluded that carbon dioxide trapped the most heat and reached an astounding temperature of 52 degrees Celsius or 125 degrees Fahrenheit. She then drew the conclusion between this and the Earth's atmosphere itself, essentially saying that if this was done at a much higher scale with insanely high amounts of carbon dioxide being released into the air, it could change the temperature of the entire Earth. These days, this is what we call the greenhouse effect. After this discovery, she drafted a paper called Circumstances Affecting the Heat of the Sun's Rays. On August 23, 1856, in Albany, New York, her paper was accepted into the 8th annual meeting of the AAAS, which stands for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Eunice Foote, however, did not present her own work, because apparently it wasn't allowed for women to present stuff back in the 1800s. Quite stupid, honestly. Instead, it was presented by another person by the name of Professor John Henry. However, even after this, her paper was not included in the published work from the AAAS, which was known as the Proceedings. To make things even worse, European summaries took out her conclusions about the impact of carbon dioxide on climate. A few years later, a man by the name of John Tyndall stole the thunder. He published his own research on carbon dioxide's effects on the Earth, and apparently he was, quote, not aware of Eunice's discovery. For the next century or so, John Tyndall would be the one credited for being the first one to make this discovery. This just goes on to show how little recognition Eunice got, and sadly, years later, on September 30th, 1888, Eunice Foote passed away. Years passed, and Eunice still didn't get the recognition she deserved. But then in 2010, a retired petroleum geologist by the name of Ray Sorensen came across Foote's work. He quickly realized that Eunice Foote was the first person to discover the connection between carbon dioxide and climate change, and that her work had gone unrecognized. In January 2011, Sorensen published his findings, which got a lot of attention. Similarly, in 2018, John Perlin discussed Foote's contributions to climate change science. A short film called Eunice was also released during the same year to honor her. It is quite astounding that as a woman in the 1800s, she achieved all of this without the support of the wider scientific community. We can only begin to fathom the amount of things she could have discovered had the circumstances been better.